Before the Mongol Empire could conquer the world, it had to conquer itself. The endless feuds of the steppe had left scars deeper than any sword, and no victory on the battlefield could erase them. Temüjin knew that if he wanted his rule to last, he needed more than fear and loyalty. He needed a law, a code that would bind warriors, merchants, and herders alike under one unbreakable order. This is the story of how the Yassa was born. Before the Mongol Empire could conquer the world, it had to conquer itself. The endless feuds of the steppe had left scars deeper than any sword, and no victory on the battlefield could erase them. Temüjin knew that if he wanted his rule to last, he needed more than fear and loyalty. He needed a law, a code that would bind warriors, merchants, and herders alike under one unbreakable order. This is the story of how the Yassa was born. Jamukha's fall removed the most dangerous rival from Temüjin's path, but it did not bring peace. Across the vast grasslands, rival banners still fluttered in the wind. The Naiman, the Merkit, and the scattered Kereit clans each held their own lands and warriors, unwilling to kneel. The steppe had known generations of shifting loyalties, and no single victory could erase that history overnight. To the west, the Naiman ruled the rich grazing lands beyond the Altai Mountains. Their leader, Genghis Khan, commanded seasoned warriors and saw himself as an equal to Temüjin. Proud and cautious, the Naiman feared what Temüjin's growing power could mean for their independence. For them, an alliance with this rising warlord would be the first step towards subjugation. To the north, the Merkit clung to the forests and river valleys, their strongholds guarding vital trade routes. Though weakened by earlier defeats, they remained skilled raiders, capable of striking caravans and settlements far from their homes. Their resistance was not just about pride, it was about survival in a world where Temüjin's law had yet to reach. The Kereit, once Temüjin's allies under Genghis Khan, had splintered after their leader's fall. Some sought refuge among the Naiman, others scattered into small bands. A few swore loyalty to Temüjin, remembering old alliances, but mistrust ran deep. The memory of betrayal on both sides lingered like an old wound that refused to heal. To the north, the Merkit clung to the forests and river valleys, their strongholds guarding vital trade routes. Though weakened by earlier defeats, they remained skilled raiders, capable of striking caravans and settlements far from their homes. Their resistance was not just about pride, it was about survival in a world where Temüjin's law had yet to reach. The Kereit, once Temüjin's allies under Genghis Khan, had splintered after their leader's fall. Some sought refuge among the Naiman, others scattered into small bands. A few swore loyalty to Temüjin, remembering old alliances, but mistrust ran deep. The memory of betrayal on both sides lingered like an old wound that refused to heal. In the west, beyond the Altai Mountains, the Naiman kingdom stood as the most formidable obstacle to Temüjin's unification of the steppe. Rich pastures fed their herds, and their warriors were hardened by years of defending these lands. Led by Genghis Khan, the Naiman saw Temüjin not as a potential ally, but as a dangerous rival who threatened their very way of life. Genghis Khan was a cautious leader, but his court was divided. Some advisors urged him to strike Temüjin before his power grew any further, while others counseled patience, hoping that Temujin's enemies to the north and east would keep him occupied. This hesitation would prove costly when Temujin made his move. Temujin prepared his forces with precision. Scouts were sent to map the valleys and mountain passes, while his generals planned the advance in secrecy. When the Mongol army finally crossed into Naiman territory, it moved swiftly, cutting off escape routes and driving the Naiman forces toward a decisive confrontation. The clash came near the foothills of the Altai. At first, the Naiman cavalry fought fiercely, using their knowledge of the terrain to harass the Mongol lines. But Temujin's disciplined formations and relentless pressure began to break their resistance. By nightfall, the battlefield was littered with the remnants of Tayang Khan's shattered army. Tayang Khan fled westward, but many of his nobles and warriors were captured. Temujin spared some who pledged loyalty, integrating them into his growing army, while others were executed as a warning. The fall of the Naiman kingdom sent a clear message. Resistance to the new order would be crushed without mercy. With the Naiman eliminated, Temujin's influence expanded dramatically across the western steppe. Trade routes once under Naiman control now served the Mongol cause, and former enemies began to reconsider their stance. The path to unifying the steppe was becoming clearer, and the Yassa was one step closer to reality. While the Naiman threat had been extinguished in the west, the Merkit still harbored a persistent enemy. For generations, they had relied on their mastery of ambush and their intimate knowledge of the rivers and wooded valleys. The Merkit had clashed with Temüjin before, most infamously in the events that had torn his family apart in his youth. Now, though weakened, they remained a thorn in his side, controlling key trade routes that linked the steppe to distant Siberia. Their presence was not only a military threat, but also an obstacle to the unified economic network Temüjin envisioned. To bring the steppe under one law, the Merkit would have to be dealt with once and for all. Temüjin understood that a direct confrontation in the dense northern terrain would be risky. The Merkit were masters of using the land to their advantage, striking swiftly and disappearing into forests and river bends. So he chose patience over haste. His scouts fanned out across the borderlands, mapping every ford, every game trail, and every hidden approach. Supplies were stockpiled in staging areas, far enough from the Merkit heartland to avoid early detection. Meanwhile, Temüjin sent envoys to nearby tribes, offering protection and trade incentives in exchange for their loyalty. These alliances formed a tightening noose around the Merkit. Temüjin's plan was not simply to defeat them in battle, it was to strip them of allies, resources, and escape routes until resistance became impossible. When the moment came, Temüjin's forces advanced like a shadow over the northern frontier. Columns of cavalry moved silently at night, guided by scouts who knew every bend in the rivers. At dawn, they struck not at the heart of Merkit territory, but at the smaller outlying camps that fed supplies and information to the main strongholds. The attacks were swift and brutal. Tents burned before their occupants could mount their horses, and watchtowers fell without sending a warning. This strategy forced the Merkit into a defensive posture, drawing them away from their fortified centers and into the open, where Mongol speed and discipline could dominate. It was a slow constriction, not a single decisive blow, but it achieved exactly what Temüjin intended. The Merkit began to lose the initiative, reacting to his moves rather than dictating their own. The Merkit were no strangers to hardship, but the relentless pressure began to wear them down. Skirmishes that they once fought with confidence now ended in retreats. Their scouts returned with grim news. Villages loyal to them had pledged allegiance to Temüjin, and former allies no longer answered their calls for aid. Supplies ran low as hunting grounds were cut off, and winter's approach tightened the noose even further. In desperation, some Merkit clans attempted to flee north into the deep taiga, hoping the vast wilderness would protect them. But the Mongol riders, accustomed to long-range pursuit, shadowed them without rest. The once proud warriors now found themselves trapped between an implacable enemy and a frozen, unforgiving land. Every choice narrowed, every path closed, until surrender or destruction were the only options left. The final clash came at the edge of a frozen river where the Merkit made a last stand. They formed a defensive ring of wagons and shields, hoping to blunt the Mongol charge. At first, the icy ground favored them. Mongol horses slipped and the charge slowed. But Temüjin's commanders adapted quickly, dismounting part of their force to fight on foot, while others circled to attack from the rear. Arrows rained down, and the ring began to splinter. The frozen river itself became a trap. Under the weight of struggling men and horses, the ice cracked, sending warriors plunging into the frigid water. What had begun as a calculated defense dissolved into chaos. By nightfall, the Merkit resistance was broken, their leaders captured or killed, and the northern frontier finally lay open to Temüjin's law. The fall of the Merkit marked more than the end of a long-standing rivalry. It was a decisive step toward the unification of the steppe under one code. With the northern frontier secured, Temüjin could now move freely between east and west, enforcing his will across a vast expanse. Former Merkit lands were redistributed among loyal commanders, and their surviving warriors, given the choice between service or death, swelled the ranks of the Mongol army. Trade routes, once plagued by raids, now carried goods safely under Mongol protection, strengthening the economic foundation for the empire to come. More importantly, the elimination of the Merkit removed one of the last excuses for endless blood feuds. In their place, the Yassa, Temüjin's vision of a single unbreakable law, began to take hold, promising order where there had only been chaos. The Kereit had once been among Temüjin's most trusted allies, bound to him through his foster father, Khan. Together, they had fought common enemies and shared victories. But alliances on the steppe were as fragile as morning frost. After Khan's downfall, the Kereit confederation shattered. Some fled west to join the Naiman. Others broke into small, wandering bands. A few leaders sought Temüjin's favor, offering their warriors in exchange for protection. Yet even these gestures were shadowed by suspicion, for the memory of betrayal lingered on both sides. The bond that had once united them was gone, replaced by a cautious and uneasy coexistence. Temüjin saw the fractured Kereit not only as a political problem, but also as a strategic opportunity. By absorbing their scattered warriors into his ranks, he could strengthen his forces without the need for a costly campaign. Envoys were dispatched to Kereit groups, offering them land, spoils, and positions within the growing Mongol military hierarchy. Those who accepted were rewarded generously, often placed under the command of trusted generals to ensure loyalty. But those who refused were gradually pushed out of fertile grazing lands, forced to wander in less hospitable regions, until hunger and hardship drove them to submission. By the time Temüjin's influence reached its peak before the Kurultai of 1206, the Kereit were no longer an independent force. They had been absorbed, displaced, or destroyed, their identity woven into the larger fabric of the Mongol nation. For Temüjin, the Kereit's fate was both a warning and a lesson. On the steppe, friendship was fleeting, but power backed by law could endure. This realization would shape the laws of the Yassa, ensuring that loyalty was tied not to blood or personal bonds, but to the authority of the Khan. With the Naiman, Merkit, and Kereit threats neutralized, Temüjin stood as the undisputed power on the steppe. But raw power was not enough to hold it. Centuries of tribal rivalry could not be erased by conquest alone. Temüjin knew that if he simply ruled as a warlord, his dominion would crumble the moment his grip weakened. To secure lasting unity, he began to lay the foundations of a system that would outlive him. His vision was clear, a law above all men, binding friend and foe alike, and a structure of governance that rewarded loyalty, skill, and service over bloodlines. This was the essence of his consolidation, transforming victory on the battlefield into stability in the realm. One of Temüjin's first acts was to reorganize his forces into the decimal system, units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, each with a designated leader. This structure ensured that no single clan could dominate a unit, as men from different tribes were deliberately mixed together. Loyalty shifted from tribe to commander, and from commander to the Khan himself. It was a radical break from tradition, dissolving centuries-old clan boundaries. For many warriors, this was the first time they fought side by side with former enemies, bound not by kinship, but by the shared banner of the Mongol nation. To bind this new army together, Temüjin began enforcing strict rules of discipline. Theft among warriors was punished harshly, regardless of rank or status. Desertion in battle was a capital offense, and cowardice brought not only shame, but the loss of one's family's protection and privileges. Yet discipline was matched with reward. Acts of bravery were recognized publicly, with promotions and gifts of horses, weapons, or even captured lands. In Temüjin's vision, justice had to be impartial. A commander's son who broke the law would be punished as swiftly as any common soldier. This uncompromising fairness began to erode the old idea that nobility was above the law. Beyond the battlefield, Temüjin rewarded loyalty with tangible benefits. Families of fallen warriors received protection and shares of future spoils, ensuring that service to the Khan was seen as an investment in a family's future. Trusted generals were given authority over newly conquered lands, but always under the Khan's ultimate oversight. This system created a direct bond between the ruler and his men, bypassing the old network of clan chiefs. Loyalty was no longer a matter of blood, it was a personal contract with Temüjin himself. This reorganization was more than a military reform, it was a cultural revolution. For centuries, loyalty on the steppe had been to one's kin and clan. Now it was to the Mongol nation and its Khan. This shift allowed Temüjin to unite warriors from rival tribes into a single, cohesive force. Over time, men who had once fought bitterly against each other began to share in the same victories and bear the same hardships. A new identity was taking root, one that saw the Mongol steppe not as a patchwork of feuding clans, but as one people under one law.
By the eve of the Great Kurultai in 1206, Temüjin had transformed a coalition of warbands into a disciplined nation in arms. Every victory, every reform, and every act of justice had brought him closer to his ultimate goal: to be acknowledged not just as a warlord, but as the Khan of all Mongols. The stage was set for the moment that would define his legacy, the birth of the Yassa and the unification of the steppe under one banner.
In the months leading up to the great Kurultai, the steppe began to stir with movement. Messengers rode across thousands of miles, carrying Temüjin's summons to every allied clan, each sealed with his personal emblem. The invitation was more than a request. It was a declaration that the time for decision had come. Herds were driven closer to grazing lands near the Onan River, where the gathering would take place. Skilled craftsmen erected vast ceremonial tents, their felt walls embroidered with the symbols of the tribes. In the open plain, spaces were marked for each clan's encampment, ensuring that rivals could keep their distance while still honoring the unity of the occasion. The air buzzed with anticipation, for all knew that this was no ordinary meeting. The fate of the entire steppe would be decided here.
Behind the scenes, Temüjin and his closest advisors worked to ensure that the Kurultai would unfold in his favor. Strategic alliances were reinforced through marriage promises, trade agreements, and the careful distribution of spoils from recent campaigns. Envoys were sent to wavering clans with personal assurances from the Khan, promising security and shared prosperity in exchange for formal allegiance. Temüjin also consulted with spiritual leaders, seeking blessings to frame his ascension as not merely a political act, but one sanctioned by divine will. Every gesture, every agreement was designed to create a web of obligation and loyalty that would be impossible to unravel once the Kurultai began.
As the appointed day drew near, the plain by the Onan River transformed into a city of felt and horsehair. Thousands of warriors stood in disciplined ranks, their armor catching the morning light. The banners of dozens of tribes flapped in the wind, each a reminder of the blood spilled to bring them here. In the center stood the grandest tent of all, reserved for the Khan's council, its entrance facing east toward the rising sun, symbolizing renewal and power. Those who arrived knew they were not merely attending a council, they were witnessing the turning of an age. In the days to come, the steppe would have a single ruler, and his word would become the law of the land. On the morning of the Kurultai, the Onan River's water shimmered under the first light of dawn. Chiefs, generals, and envoys gathered in a great circle around the central tent, their banners forming a sea of colors against the endless grassland. The air was heavy with anticipation. This was the day the tribes would choose a single leader to unite them all. One by one, the clan elders stepped forward, offering gifts, prized horses, fine bows, and silver ornaments as symbols of their submission. As each pledge was made, the circle tightened, drawing all eyes toward the center, where Temüjin stood, calm and resolute. The murmurs of the crowd swelled into a chant, carrying his name across the plain, a sound that seemed to echo with the weight of destiny. When the time came, the eldest among the assembled chiefs stepped forward to speak. In a voice both steady and ceremonial, he proclaimed Temüjin as Genghis Khan, a title that, in the ancient tongue, meant universal ruler, or oceanic Khan, vast and endless like the sea. At that moment, the gathered tribes erupted in cheers, drums thundered, and horsemen galloped in celebration, circling the assembly. The title was more than an honor. It was a contract, binding every warrior, herdsman, and family under the authority of the Khan. In that instant, the Mongol Steppe ceased to be a patchwork of rival clans and became a single nation. As the celebrations continued, Temüjin addressed his people for the first time as Genghis Khan. He spoke of unity, justice, and the law that would protect the weak as well as the strong. He promised that under his rule, no clan would be above another, and that all would stand equal before the Yassa, the great code soon to be proclaimed. His words were not merely a speech, they were a vision of a new order, one that would transform the steppe from a land of constant blood feuds into the heart of an empire. In that moment, the horizon seemed limitless, and the future of the Mongol nation stretched beyond the reach of any enemy. With his title secured, Genghis Khan's first act as supreme ruler was to lay down the framework of the Yassa, a code of laws meant to bind the steppe under a single standard of justice. The Yassa was not written on parchment, but carried in the minds of appointed law-keepers and proclaimed aloud at assemblies so that every man, woman, and child would know its decrees. It was a living code, adaptable to new challenges, yet unyielding in its core principles: loyalty to the Khan, equality before the law, and the preservation of order above all else. In a land where blood feuds had once dictated life and death, the Yassa promised a new foundation, one in which justice came from the Khan's word, not from the blade of a rival. One of the most revolutionary aspects of the Yassa was its rejection of privilege based on birth. Under the new law, the son of a noble who committed theft faced the same punishment as a common herder. Murder, regardless of the victim's status, was a capital offense, and the guilty could not escape judgment through bribes or clan influence. In an age when justice often favored the powerful, this impartiality was shocking. Yet it earned Genghis Khan the respect of those who had long suffered under arbitrary rule. The Yassa made it clear, all were equal under the law, and no one was above it, not even the Khan himself. The Yassa extended beyond criminal law into the daily lives of the Mongol people. It regulated the sharing of spoils after a campaign, ensuring that every soldier received his due portion. It dictated how trade was to be conducted, protecting merchants from fraud and guaranteeing safe passage through Mongol lands. It even outlined rules for hunting seasons, preserving the steppe's resources to prevent famine. In these provisions, the Yassa was not only a tool of justice, but also of governance, shaping the economy, environment, and social fabric of the emerging empire. Perhaps the greatest achievement of the Yassa was its role in transforming the Mongol identity. Before its creation, allegiance was to the clan, and justice was carried out according to each tribe's customs. The Yassa replaced this patchwork of traditions with a single, unified system. Over time, it forged a common sense of belonging, a belief that to be Mongol was not merely to share blood, but to live under the same law. This cultural unification was as critical to the empire's future as any military conquest. The Yassa was inseparable from the authority of Genghis Khan himself.
Though the code applied to all, its enforcement ultimately rested on the Khan's will. This personal connection gave the law both its strength and its vulnerability. Strength because it carried the full weight of the ruler's authority. Vulnerability because it relied on the continued power and integrity of the ruler. For now, with Genghis Khan's leadership unchallenged, the Yassa's authority was absolute, and its reach extended from the edges of the Gobi to the Siberian forests. In the years to come, the Yassa would be tested in battlefields, markets, and council halls. It would face rebellion, famine, and the temptations of power. Yet its core principles would endure, shaping the Mongol Empire long after its founder was gone. For Genghis Khan, the Yassa was more than law. It was the foundation of an empire. His promise to the people that unity and order would outlast his own lifetime. And in that promise lay the secret of his enduring legacy. With the Yassa freshly proclaimed, Genghis Khan sought the opportunity to prove its worth beyond the steppe. That chance came swiftly in the form of the Tangut Kingdom, known to the Mongols as the Western Shah. Situated on the edge of the Gobi Desert, Tangut lands controlled vital trade routes that connected China to Central Asia. A campaign against them would not only expand Mongol influence, but also test the ability of the Yassa to govern newly conquered peoples. For Genghis Khan, this was more than a military expedition. It was the first trial of his vision for an empire ruled by law, where discipline, fairness, and order would extend to friend and foe alike. Before launching his armies, Genghis Khan sent envoys to the Tangut court, offering terms that reflected the Yassa's principles, recognition of Mongol supremacy in exchange for protection, fair taxation, and guaranteed trade. This was an early example of how the Yassa could be used as a diplomatic tool, offering stability and benefits in return for obedience. The Tangut, however, refused, relying on their fortified cities and the harsh desert to keep the Mongols at bay. Their rejection meant that the principles of the Yassa would be carried into war, shaping not only how the campaign was fought, but also how victory would be managed. The campaign began with rapid strikes against Tangut border forts. Mongol forces, moving in disciplined formations, adhered strictly to the Yassa's rules for the treatment of captured civilians and the distribution of supplies. Loot was catalogued and stored under guard until it could be divided according to the code, preventing disputes that might fracture the army's unity. These measures surprised many Tangut defenders, who were accustomed to raiders that took what they pleased without restraint. Here, the Yassa was demonstrating its ability to turn a warband into a disciplined, law-bound army. As the Mongols advanced deeper into Tangut territory, they encountered fortified cities unlike anything on the steppe. Siege warfare required patience, and the Yassa provided clear regulations for the conduct of such campaigns, from the rationing of food to the rotation of troops. Even during prolonged sieges, the law forbade wanton destruction of resources that could later support Mongol rule. When a city finally surrendered, its population was recorded, taxed, and placed under the Khan's protection, rather than subjected to indiscriminate slaughter. This approach was as much about building an empire as it was about winning a war. The eventual submission of the Tangut was not just a military victory. It was a demonstration of the Yassa's ability to govern conquered lands. Tangut officials were incorporated into the Mongol administration, their knowledge of local trade and agriculture used to strengthen the empire. Taxes were collected according to the code, and caravans began to move safely across once hostile territory. For the first time, the principles of the Yassa extended beyond the Mongol heartland, showing it could bind together diverse peoples under a single legal system. For Genghis Khan, the Tangut campaign confirmed what he had long believed, that power alone could win battles, but only law could hold an empire together. The Yassa had passed its first major test, guiding the Mongols not only to victory, but to sustainable rule over new lands. From this point forward, every conquest would be measured not just in territory gained, but in how effectively the Yassa could bind it into the greater whole. The empire's expansion had begun, and with it, the reach of the law. By the time the dust settled from the Tangut campaign, the Mongol Steppe had been transformed. What had once been a fractured land of rival clans was now united under one ruler, bound by a single law. The Naiman, Merkit, and Kereit were no more. Their warriors now rode under the same banner as former enemies, guided by the same code. Trade routes flowed freely. Disputes were settled not by blood, but by judgment. And the Khan's word carried the weight of absolute authority. In just a few years, Genghis Khan had achieved what generations of chieftains could not: a lasting unity born not only from conquest, but from the promise of order. The Yassa was more than a set of rules. It was the backbone of a new civilization. It ensured that power served the people, not the other way around, and that loyalty was earned through justice as much as through strength. Genghis Khan's genius lay not only in his ability to win battles, but in his understanding that an empire could not endure without a unifying law. As word of the Mongol system spread, distant lands began to take notice not just of their military might, but of the order that followed in their wake. The unification of the steppe under the Yassa was only the beginning. Beyond the horizon lay kingdoms richer and armies larger than any the Mongols had yet faced. But Genghis Khan now commanded not just an army, but a nation, disciplined, united, and bound by law. The steppe had given birth to a power unlike any the world had seen before, and its shadow was about to fall far beyond its windswept plains. From the ashes of endless tribal wars, Genghis Khan forged not just an empire, but a new way of life, bound by the Yassa and united under one banner. His legacy was written not only in the lands he conquered, but in the order he created. If you've enjoyed this journey through the rise of the Mongol nation, there are countless more stories waiting to be told. Tales of power, ambition, and the people who shaped our world. Subscribe to the channel, join our community, and be part of the adventure as we uncover the legends of history, one chapter at a time.